and gamers together now have the sheer magnitude to be a significant unifying force for the world.
If I'm to choose between a greater and lesser evil, I'd rather not choose at all.
You were almost a jibble sandwich.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
Be better.
Check this out.
Hello humans, what's going on? Welcome back to The Hungry Gamers episode 340. I'm your host, Jono Peck. You can find me everywhere at Jono himself. And joining me all the way from the Sunshine State, as has been the case for the past 3 weeks now, it's Mr. Matt Tilby, who you can find everywhere at It's Tilby. Matt, this is our last chance to leave an impression with the dear Hungry Gamers listeners before Brendan's back on Australian soil, back in our ear holes. I know that there's, people miss that salt and pepper purple Jesus, but I think we're doing okay in his absence.
Yeah, look, we're on the was it the 10-day contract if we're using basketball terms. The Hoop Dreams boys are filling the seat in while he's off on his European sojourn. But yeah, look, it's been an excellent couple of weeks hanging out with both you and Brendan, and we're hopefully going to finish on a high on this week. Yeah, it helps that there's a bit of news to talk about. So we might start off, Matt Tilby, with what we've been up to.
The week that was.
Tilby, I've been watching a little TV show called The Fall of the House of Usher. Have you been aware of the hype and discussion around this series?
I was aware of it. I've not really taken the time to watch it. As I said, I think last week, I'm not a particularly big horror person, but I have obviously heard a lot about people have been spreading the gospel of Mike Flanagan and what he's been able to do with a couple of the sort of, I think it was The Haunting of Hill House or Hill Manor or
House,
something.
yes, that's right. Bly Manor, Hill House, Midnight Mass.
Easy to get them confused, obviously, but I've heard a lot of great things about his sort of style of horror and drama that he's been able to create over the last couple of years. Heard good things about the cast, and I think I've heard a little bit because of Rahul Kohli was in it, and he's one of my sort of favorite actors and content creators of the last couple of years. But yeah, sounds great. Yeah, he's becoming one of the favorites of Mike Flanagan. He pretty much uses the same cast over and over again, as some directors enjoy doing. And you're right, this is the latest from Mike Flanagan. Brendan kind of had a little dig at us during the week that there wasn't quite enough horror in the Halloween special last week. So let's keep it going. Let it bleed into this week's episode with this and Alan Wake 2, which we'll be talking about again. But yes, Fall of the House of Usher. It is less horror than the other shows we talked about, though it's still very much got some scares and some darkness to it. It is based on a short story from Edgar Allan Poe, so it's a very old narrative that's been rehashed and remade several times in the age of cinema and TV. And Mike Flanagan really is the perfect person to bring it into the modern age because of the series that we've mentioned earlier. Midnight Mass was actually, I said last week about how Until Dawn was the game that got me in the door of playing horror games, and Midnight Mass was probably actually the series that got me open to the idea of, or maybe horror is something I can get into, because I took a chance on that one and I loved it, and I think it's still my favorite of the Netflix series that he's been doing for the past 3 or 4 years. And The Fall of the House of Usher is, this isn't a spoiler because it's part of the premise of the show, but it begins with this drug company mogul who is, worth a lot of money. He's made, billions probably, if not hundreds, multi-millions in his lifetime. And all of his children and offspring have died. And he's the last one left. And it kind of then goes back after that first episode to show how each of these people met their demise and the circumstances around it, and the mysterious presence of this woman / figure known as the Raven in some circles, and what exactly led to this event that's caused all these children to die in his life. And it's very creepy, and it's very there's elements of like Final Destination where this person's going to die, so it's more about like what are the circumstances that are going to lead to their eventual death, and what kind of creative way is that going to be illustrated up on the screen. But I feel like narratively it's not, to me, not as strong in terms of like connecting with the characters like you do with something like Midnight Mass, and that ongoing narrative of what's going to happen next, because they kind of give away with the premise of the whole show. There's not that mystery of like who's going to live and who's going to die, but at the thematic level, if you enjoy TV shows and films that dig into that kind of thing, and there's many references to the works of Edgar Allan Poe. Not that I'm like crazy familiar with them, but for the literature buffs or people that enjoy the layered approach to storytelling that's trying to say something, there's a lot here to enjoy. And I've seen a lot of people putting this kind of in the topper echelon of the Mike Flanagan pile. It's probably in the middle for me, but still been a really, really good time.
Yeah, it definitely seems like, and once again, this is me not having really sort of jumped into a lot of Flanagan's work, but it definitely seems like he takes a lot of time and care into sort of that aesthetic, and definitely really, as you said, layering those sorts of stories, and making sure everything seems to be connected. And I think that could only really sort of make for a much more engrossing experience. Obviously, some people may enjoy horror that's a little bit more cheap, the jump scares and things like that, but that more sort of like psychological horror, and sort of working with that sort of, as we mentioned last week, of course, that dread, that feeling of dread that sort of hangs over people. I think that sort of is a key thing. But like, not having seen it, I can't really say what it's like, but if it's anything like that, consider me someone who'd be having their interest piqued for sure.
Very good. What have you been watching?
I have last night I just started the first 2 episodes of Invincible season 2. Came out last night. Obviously, we're recording on the Saturday. This came out on the Friday, November 3rd. And it pretty much picks up like right after the events of season 1, which is great. Obviously, don't want to spoil anything if you've not watched Invincible at all, and we definitely recommend it. Unless you are of the sort of like squeamish variety, because it's like a little gory, a little over the top.
For a cartoon, it's up there with there's Ren and Stimpy, and then up way at the top, it's like it's basically The Boys animated in terms
that's
of
a good link
where they'll go with the violence.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison for sure. But I think it does the first episode does a really good job of sort of following along from season 1, and so obviously Mark Grayson, who is played by Stephen Yeun, does a really good, and it sort of explores his psyche, and how he sort of deals with the events of the last season, and sort of the last couple of episodes. And obviously don't want to spoil too much, but Omni-Man, who we all know is this omnipotent being, and obviously voiced by J.K. Simmons, he sort of looms large over this season. Like, no one knows where he is, and he's sort of like, when's he going to appear, and what's going to happen with him, and it's a really sort of like looming sort of uncomfortable feeling over the entire series, which is great. But and then episode 2 is actually a prequel, so they're sort of doing like the Last of Us TV show, where they're sort of going back, and this one is actually it's almost like the formative years of Adam Eve, who is the character who's played by Gillian Jacobs in the series. So it's actually a really good sort of look at how she grew up, and her going through school, and sort of gaining her powers and things like that. So if it means that we're going to get more of these sorts of things where we'll see how these superheroes got their powers and how they lived and how they grew up, I think it'd be really cool. But all in all, I think it's a really sort of solid start. It's a little bit sort of slow, obviously sort of dealing with the events of the last season, but a really good start so far.
Yeah, I'm keen to check that out. I am a bit kind of unsure about the way that they're, I think, dropping 4 episodes straight up, and then 4 in like February or something.
I only saw 2 when I was on there last night. I'd have to double check if there are
Right.
more, but
So it might be 2, and then 2 maybe next week or over the
yeah, I
next
feel like
2
they're going to
weeks.
sort of stagger at least a couple of them,
Yeah.
and then, like, as you said, you were correct. Like, they're going to have, I think, like the second half of the season. Was it next year? I think, but it's a
Yeah.
weird,
It's
weird way to do things for sure.
it is, because you want to. I don't know. It just seems like I'm struggling to think of a reason that's makes any sense. Like, I get it when if you split up a 16 episode or a 10 episode season in half, you can kind of get away with it doing that mid-season break, which we saw become a thing even back when, like, Breaking Bad and I think AMC were probably some of the first to do it with The Walking Dead, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, definitely. But yeah, I feel like something like this, it's just like, give it to me now, give it to me everywhere, give it to me, please. money me now.
Me sick.
And over on the video game space, a bit more of the same for you.
Yeah, definitely. Still just trudging my way through Spider-Man 2 and probably more of Mario Wonder this week, to be honest. I wanted to get dig a little bit deeper into that. I think with Spider-Man, I'm still going through the side missions and sort of clearing up as much as I can for the 100% or as much of it as I can get. But yeah, Mario Wonder.
Any feelings that have changed since last week about either of those games?
I am very much hating a certain type of or a certain task or sort of type of mission that you have to do on the side missions. I don't want to spoil too much, but the symbiotes are involved, and I think they are particularly annoying. I won't say much more.
This is the
than
time-based one.
This is the one where you have
Say
to do.
That.
You can defend a certain thing. You have to sort of wave defense essentially
for a certain amount of time. Yeah.
I've spent a number of hours on certain ones of that. It's not particularly fun.
Seriously? Jeez.
Yeah, I was not.
Get good, man.
I was.
You got to use every
struggling.
tool in your disposal. Yeah.
I have been, and I've just. It's like they, as I mentioned last week, like they tend to just throw as many people as they can at you because it's like, oh, you've got all these powers and skills, and then my brain's like, oh, you remember you can do that, and you're like 2 health, and you're like near dead, and you're like, you could have done that earlier. So that's me just trying to figure things out.
There's one particular gadget that's very effective, super effective against those guys, and I tend to use that to do a bit of crowd control. But yeah, it's a game that lets you approach combat in a multitude of ways, so it's makes sense to do it differently for different types of enemies. And hey, if you're spending hours on it, I would say bump that difficulty down to story mode because life's too short to get stuck on side quests for that amount of time.
Yeah,
you've got a lot of games to get through, man.
Yeah, I know. I've got to. I feel like the accomplishment really would have just been to keep it on normal and get the
There's
platinum.
no shame,
but yeah,
there's no shame. You can still get the platinum on the easiest difficulty. It's not difficulty based. So
yes, and if you have any issues with that, you can always at Brendan 8-bit and let him know. Definitely do not at me because I do not care. And yeah, of course, Mario Wonder, just as weird and wild and pun intended wonderful as I thought it was going to be. This is definitely in sort of like my top 5, at least maybe even top 3 for game of the year. It just brings that sort of fun back to the 2D platforming Mario style that we've had for a while, and yeah, I can't speak enough highly of it.
Very cool. Well, I have been playing Alan Wake 2 as referenced earlier to keep the spooky vibes going, and man, Remedy they've really gone for it with this game, and I'm so impressed with what they've come up with. We knew that the reviews were pretty good, I think, as we said last week, sitting around 90, 91 on Metacritic, and the step up from Alan Wake to Alan Wake 2 it's like night and day. It's like from The Witcher 2 to The Witcher 3.
Yeah.
Not that it's the same type of game, but there's been a certain evolution in the genre, in the way that Alan Wake was really kind of an action adventure game, and this feels much more survival horror. Feels like they've taken deep influence from the Resident Evil remake series. I can speak to the remakes much more than, I guess, the more modern like 7 and Village Resident Evils. But the way that you have your items and even the way that you're revisiting the same areas uh, that are opening up in different ways as the game progresses, and areas have more significance when you come back later, or they might appear slightly different. Retreading that same space feels very Resident Evil 2, especially to me, and I'm really digging it. Playing as the multiple characters, you've obviously got Alan Wake as the titular character, but then Saga Anderson, the FBI agent that's investigating some cult murders in this area of Bright Springs, I think is the name of the
Bright
town.
Falls, probably.
Bright, yes, Bright Falls. Yeah, it's very Twin Peaksy. Like even like the first one was very Twin Peaks. This is even more Twin Peaks in certain ways, and it really is Twin Peaks meets Resident Evil to me. And what's not to like with that? So I'm having a very good time. I'm still quite early on in the game, but really looking forward to finishing that. The story's really weird, as you would expect, and it's also just impressive how quickly this game was made, because I think it was like a 3-year development cycle. It wasn't a crazy expensive project from what I gather. I know like having your development team based in Europe is a lot different than the US, but what they've been able to do in that time since Control and the Control DLC is really like it's a really AAA experience without breaking the bank. And I think a lot of other developers could learn from that. Particularly, like we're going to get into a little bit more later about what's happening at Sony, and Xbox could also, with their much lower output, especially with some of those big franchises that they have, some big IPs that haven't really delivered the goods for a long time. It's super impressive what they've done with that team without spending 100 or $200 million that a lot of AAAs seem to get something that looks and feels this good.
Yeah, definitely. I think what Remedy, I think, has done over the last, I'd say maybe decade, we can say, like, they've done a lot in terms of obviously creating a fun game, but it's the experience that I feel like they've really captured.
Mm-hmm.
Even when, like, obviously the Max Payne games are whatnot, but like, I think just seeing Sam Lake in the flesh in real life is just such a jarring experience. So whenever
It's
I hear
so
Remedy,
weird.
it's
When he showed up in this, he shows up in Alan Wake 2, and I'm like, oh, he's back. Is he Max Payne?
I think, but it's the way that not only they combine their worlds. I think obviously you've had that sort of talk about like Quantum Break, Alan Wake, and Control all being sort of in its one, MCU style universe. But also the way that they combine video game and live action. Obviously, how that they did a lot of that with Quantum Break. It was almost like a TV show in a video game, and I felt like that was cool, and sort of seeing that for the first time, and how they sort of integrated that into Control, and then obviously Alan Wake 2, you saw a little bit more of it as you go along, and even seeing like Sean Ashmore in the game. Obviously, the lead character in Quantum Break, I was like, is he playing the same character or that sort of thing? But I think what they do just in general in terms of like making it a much more complete, full experience, and as you said, without the sort of budget that they're obviously spending, like, I think it's very, very impressive, and they really need to be looked at as one of the bigger sort of AAA teams out there. I think that what they've been able to put out there has been wholly impressive.
Yeah. I hope they don't get acquired by anyone.
Well, now you've just jinxed it. So
they're in that territory now. It's like, oh, maybe Phil Spencer's like, oh, maybe we can get them to teach us how to make games in less than 5 or 6 years. Which kind of brings us into
news and notes from around the internet, presented by Audio Technica.
More from Remedy. We've got a little bit of an update from their investor meeting. Here's some news as transcribed by our friends over at Press Start. A bit of an update on the projects in development that have stated that the sequel to 2019's Control is still in the proof of concept stage, which is a bit earlier than I hoped that development would be, because I am really excited for the sequel to Control. The quote we got from that investor meeting was, "The plans for this sequel are ambitious, and we have seen good progress both in designs and in the game build." Meanwhile, the remake of Max Payne 1 and 2 seems to be kicking into gear, now in the production readiness stage. The quote here is, "We have gained clarity on the style and scope of the game, and we have an exceptionally well-organized team working on it. With these accomplishments, we are excited about the project and its future success." The note also mentions Condor, a cooperative multiplayer game, which has also progressed from the proof of concept to the production readiness stage. Remedy say they have acquired what they believe are valuable insights into making service-based games, and they feel it's in a good spot to launch a game that players will stick with for the long haul. Lastly, a fourth title in codename Vanguard is aiming towards completing the proof of concept stage by the end of the year. So there's nothing amazingly ground-shatteringly newsworthy in this update, but I guess the reason I wanted to talk about it is because, from the success of Alan Wake 2, from the response to Alan Wake 2, it's exciting to see that they're not going anywhere. They've already got plans for all these other projects to work on, and I think there's a lot to be excited about in what's still to come, with that combination of not just resting on the laurels of Control or resting on the laurels of Alan Wake, but these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different IPs that they're talking about in the space of a few years. It's pretty cool, isn't it?
It is. I think my biggest issue would be just how burnt out these developers are going to be, because as you said, like that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 IPs, both, reoccurring or returning IPs and new ones. Like, you obviously don't want to stretch people too thin, if that makes sense. I think like if you had maybe Control in the proof of concept and then, Condor or Conde Vanguard, whatever they may be, that's fine. But I think having 5 in the one go is a little bit concerning. I think it would be interesting to see what happens with Condor. I think obviously with all of the talk about Bungie, which we'll get into in a little bit, and sort of how their sort of live service game in the form of Destiny has sort of flagged a little bit. The fact that they believe they found valuable insights into, as you said, making service-based games, and feels it's in a good spot to launch a game the players will stick with for the long haul. That's a bold claim, especially what's come out in the last couple of weeks. And I think
it's like, you sure about that?
You sure about that? I think it's like going from the story-driven stuff from the likes of Control and Max Payne into something that is probably more, fluid and sort of changes with how gamers play is going to be a big step, a big jump for any team really. But yeah, it's a lot to be excited about. I think, we won't hear too much about any of these games for a little while, but it's a good sort of sign for Remedy in general.
Yeah, for all we know, this could be like a 6 to 10 year plan that they're talking about here. And given how efficient they've been the past few years, I'm not concerned that they're going to have any kind of internal dramas. You don't really hear about the same issues that seem to plague other big developers. Speaking of issues plaguing developers, the next headline is AI Voices A-OK with Finals developer Embark Studios. This one was getting a bit of steam across socials this week. So the Finals developer Embark Studios have responded to criticism from voice actors and developers after being slammed for using AI voiceovers in their hit shooter. Well, is it a hit? I don't know. It hasn't quite. Is it released already, Finals?
It's in some sort of, I think it was in beta, but it's definitely like, from all accounts, it seems
playable.
like it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I did see PlayStation had it like as their sponsored game on the store. So it's very much front and center as far as shooters of this type go. So initially talking about the use of AI on the Meet the Makers podcast, Developers said the technology is far enough in terms of quality that it saves them supposed months of voice work to be able to record lines for new additions to the game within hours. Obviously, they're also saving money by not paying human voice actors. The use of AI went somewhat viral when it was highlighted on social media by voice actor Gianni Matrigrano, and the development practice drew widespread criticism from people within the industry, as well as the broader games community. Embark Studios responded saying, making games without actors isn't an end goal, and claimed it uses a mix of both recorded audio voices and audio generated via AI text-to-speech tools for its games. That quote was told via an Embark spokesperson to IGN. Sometimes recording real scenes where actors get together, allowing character chemistry and conflict to shape the outcome, is something that adds depth to our game worlds that technology can't emulate. Other times, especially when it relates to contextual in-game action callouts, TTS allows us to have tailored voiceover where we otherwise wouldn't. For example, due to speed of implementation. Matt Tilby, what's your take on this drama and the criticism they've received and their response to said criticism?
Jono Peck, I think it is a interesting sort of situation to be in, because I can understand the stance that Embark is sort of taking in terms of like finding any way to make their sort of work process faster, cheaper, easier, but obviously at the same time having talked to a number of voice actors and sort of seen what their methods are and how they tend to go about their work, it's very, very difficult to just deny them these opportunities. Like, I can understand you're saving hours or potentially hours, days, weeks, whatever it may be, of getting in a studio, recording voice lines, editing, all that sort of stuff. But like, this is their livelihood, and this is probably not the thing that I think voice actors would have expected when they were sort of signing up for auditions for games like this. So it's obviously disappointing that they feel like this sort of thing has to happen. Like, if it means that they're sort of tidying up certain things, or in the case of I think it was for Cyberpunk, the voice actor who voiced, I think, Victor, had actually passed away. He passed away, I think, in between the release of Cyberpunk and then the release of Phantom Liberty.
Yeah.
And the family actually said, "Hey, we're going to give you the permission to, reuse his sort of voice likeness and use like AI to record his voice." In those sorts of situations, I can kind of understand it. But if you're just using this purely just to sort of fill out, your voice roles and sort of save time, then I'm kind of not in a particularly, positive mood about it.
Yeah, the response to the backlash really rings quite hollow to me, because to begin with, they were kind of bragging about the time that it saves them, when we know that it's about the money that they're saving. And then they go on to talk about how like there's basically advantages to the process and the speed at which they can do all this stuff, and how the context of it, and it's just all this like, no, like just admit that it's a really budget restraint project you're working on, and you either couldn't afford to have voice actors, or you had to like drop something else from the game. Like, in my opinion, be way more open about it and way more upfront about the reasons for this, because they almost make it sound like it was an aesthetic choice, because they commented, I left it out of there, but they commented on this being like a quirky, weird kind of world they've created, and if the characters with AI dialogue sound a bit janky and off, then it kind of adds into that world they're creating. And it's like, just no, like as a widespread practice, like this is a one case we're talking about at the moment, and maybe they'll get away with it and players that pick up the game won't care. But if this is a sign of things to come, it's very concerning, because people can tell that these are AI voice actors, and as soon as you can tell that they're AI voice actors, or that it's AI generated, I should say, you've failed. Like, we don't want to be playing something thinking that it's a robot, unless it's a character that's meant to sound like a robot. And it's kind of a separate conversation altogether about the integrity of art and the importance of keeping the arts alive and supporting voice actors and supporting artists and all that kind of thing. It's a conversation we're going to have many times over, especially now that AI is becoming intelligent enough to be used in this context, and we're going to see art that's made and implemented in games made with AI, and we're probably going to get dynamic quests in Bethesda games or something that generated in game based on your actions using AI, and some of that is kind of interesting and exciting, but ultimately there's going to be a lot of commentary and criticism, I think, about anything that takes jobs away from people, and it's really just it's really the developer walking back some of those comments that's to me quite interesting and disappointing, because it's not on.
Yeah, it's a slippery
And
slope.
they're paying for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a slippery slope, and I think, if your intentions are good, like, you can try and weasel your way out of it, but like, it doesn't look good in any situation. Like, I think I heard people sort of saying like, "Hey, why don't EA Sports use like AI to sort of add new lines into the game based on what's happening in real time?" And like, even then, it just doesn't feel right. And it's like, imagine if like Roger Clark, his entire like performance as Arthur Morgan was just AI, like completely different game. I think you can't sort of, I guess, connect with certain performances, characters, games if they're just an AI voice that's monotonous down the line, sort of thing. So I think we're all going to have to sort of get to that point sooner or later where we sort of think, is this going to be good for voice acting? We've seen it in art, we've seen it in TVs and TV shows and movies. Like, it's going to keep happening, and unfortunately, yes, we're going to have to keep sort of discussing it.
Yeah, and like some of the excuses again, you don't have to book a studio session. Pretty much every voice actor, especially since COVID, has an at-home studio. They can go in there, they can record their lines in a matter of hours. You can have this, what did they call it? Like, they're talking about, we can quickly create lines to respond to what's happening in things that are changing and evolving, and the dynamicness of what they want to do. Like, you can be dynamic with voice actors. If you've got someone under contract and it's part of their contract to do pickups and to do continued dialogue, as a lot of these arena shooters probably do, then they can send it to you within the day. Like, how much quicker do you need this stuff generated? And for the cost, like, I don't know, it depends whether you go union or non-union, but there's a lot of voice actors who aren't asking for thousands and thousands of dollars because they're not at that point in their career, or they're not in that part of the industry. So we're talking about indies who don't have any budget at all, and they want to create a multitude of voices for a game that has a lot of dialogue. That's a circumstance where I can understand maybe someone coughs up and uses the AI and gets away with it, because it's either that or nothing. And we all understand the restraints that especially like teams of one or two people might be under, compared to a team that's huge making a game that's on the front page of PlayStation with a publisher and all this jazz. So context matters, and I'm not going to say like it shouldn't ever be done. There's no room for it. I think that AI does have a future in the creative process to some degree. What exactly, I'm not 100% sure, and it's going to be constantly evolving. But I think context matters, and this one doesn't pass the smell test.
Yeah, I'm totally on the same page.
Bond details. James Bond details. Matt Tilby, IO Interactor, the developer of Hitman, has revealed some details about the upcoming James Bond game, Project 007. In an interview with Edge magazine, IO Interactive CEO Hakan Abran said the game would be a more scripted experience than Hitman's freeform jaunts, and was pitched as the ultimate spycraft fantasy. While it isn't based on any existing interpretation of James Bond, the game will be closer to Daniel Craig than Roger Moore, according to the interview. With more than a year remaining in the development cycle, there's still plenty of time for these details to change, but I think it's interesting to get a feel for the direction of Project 007. Matt Tilby, what do you want from a modern James Bond game?
I would have loved if it was just straight up like Hitman, but with a James Bond character just walking around like putting suits on and hiding people in boxes and being real stealthy, or as guns blazing as you wanted to be. That would have been fun. I think in that sort of, like, if they keep in that sort of vein of that, obviously that, as you said, like more scripted experience in where you can't really sort of divert as much as you really want to, but if they sort of keep that sort of style of play and sort of, third person over the shoulder sort of thing, I'll absolutely give it a go. Like, IO have done such a great job with the Hitman series as a whole, and the last sort of couple of games have been a lot of fun. I think they've just been a little bit too samey. They sort of blend together in my mind and sort of just create one big Hitman game that I can't sort of like differentiate one from the other. But yeah, like the gameplay has always been really fun and really solid. I think if they can sort of bring some of that fun and experience into obviously a James Bond game, like, I'd absolutely take it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, I can't tell you what story beats happen in which Hitman game, or which levels happened in which one, and especially the fact that they've merged them all together into different packs and collections, and you buy Hitman 3 and it has access to all the previous levels. It is very much just one amorphous blob of Hitman, but it's all good, and I love that trilogy especially. And if you told me that it was going to be Hitman, that's as this interview indicates, a little bit more scripted, so not quite as open ended, and you've got your objective, and however you get there doesn't matter. So if we've got a little bit more maybe dialogue, Agent 47 doesn't really talk to people, and James Bond does. So if you've got a bit more speech check marks, like in an RPG style, and a combination of taking the waiter's uniform and serving drinks, and using your different 007 gadgets to get into rooms and to access information and to cheat at poker or whatever you might be doing. I think you take a game like Hitman, if you get caught and things go south, it's pretty much game over. But as we know from 007 movies, he's not shy to open fire on rooms full of hitmen, or grunts, or what do you call that, the backup for the villains, the henchmen. He'll take out hundreds of henchmen, and I think that needs to be part of this game. You need to be able to have like an AK-47 or something and open fire and turn into a cover-based shooter if things go south. So I'd like to see that implemented, even if it's a scripted event, like in an Uncharted or something. I think there's a lot of potential for a game like this, and based on how well IO delivered the Hitman experience, I've got high hopes for what they might be able to get away with.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to see what they bring about. I don't know if Project 007 is going to be the name of the game, but it does, like, even if they do change it, like, it does sound like a fun title for a game. So yeah, very excited.
It sounds like a code name, definitely.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I'm sure it will have some kind of like Bond-esque name. Tomorrow Lives Again, or Die Twice but Not Today.
Where's your check in the mail? That's perfect.
You could definitely AI generate some Bond titles.
Absolutely. There you go.
Okay. The story of the week: Bungie jumping into unemployment. Apologies to all at Bungie for that headline. The following details are coming via reports from Bloomberg and Forbes, as well as information taken from multiple staff members posting about it on social media. While Sony paid $3.7 billion for Destiny developer Bungie in 2022, including $1.2 billion for staff retention, the developer has now laid off an estimated 100 jobs from its staff of about 1,200 people. This approximate 8% reduction follows dire management warnings earlier this month of a sharp drop in the popularity of its flagship video game, Destiny 2. Just 2 weeks ago, executives told staff that revenue was running 45% below projections for the year, according to people who attended the meeting. We know these cuts include various high-profile, tenured employees of the studio, though most seem to be focused in the publishing department. Writing on its website, Bungie has called this week one of the most difficult in our studio's history and acknowledged that it's lost a lot of players' trust with its recent Destiny content. CEO Pete Parsons is said to have told staff that salary and hiring freezes would be taking place 2 weeks earlier. However, we know firsthand via social media that the layoffs took staff by complete surprise, with email access and company services instantly revoked, managers receiving no prior notice about who would be affected, and no opportunities provided for goodbyes or exchanging of contacts. Staff with shares from the Sony acquisition that haven't yet vested will lose them. Meanwhile, reports from Bloomberg have revealed the next Destiny 2 expansion, the final shape, has been pushed from February to a June release date, while upcoming extraction shooter Marathon has been delayed to 2025. Matt Tilby, this is a story. This is I've got a couple of different directions that I want to go with this, but first of all, what the heck is going on at Bungie? And the way that it was handled, I think especially, is disappointing, with the way that there was just no warning, no grace period, no 4 weeks, 2 weeks notice, whatever it is. What was your reaction as this story developed and we learnt more and more over the course of the week?
I think that was the biggest thing for me as well, was just how people were told of their firing, and people who were on their days off or were on sick leave were told to come in and immediately just given without warning. People clamoring for their computers, trying to get things off their computers before they were locked out of emails and computer accounts. Like, it sounded like it was absolute hell on earth. Like, there were people just crying at their desks and things like that. Like, Bungie have handled this appallingly. Like, this is absolute worst case scenario for any studio, and really an example of how not to handle any sort of layoff for any company. It's just absolutely massive. Like, we talked about it last week in terms of like Media Molecule, and it's just going to keep happening, isn't it? It's really frustrating. It's a really sad indictment of the way that we all seem to think the games industry is this perfect utopia for people coming in and wanting to work on the things that they love. But the reality is, people are being burnt out. People are losing their jobs for nothing, and there's no backup. There's no support for them. Like, we're lucky in Australia to have like places like Game Workers Australia, which is this new union that sort of helps people with salary inquiries and sort of links with the Fair Work Union or Fair Work Commission and things like that. Like, we're lucky to have that sort of stuff here, where we're at least given some sort of protection or some sort of a shield from these sorts of issues. But like, people in the US don't have that, and really, like, we're seeing small pockets of teams and companies start to unionize, but it's going to be years, maybe even decades, before we see any sort of significant move in this wild west of US games development. And it's unfortunately, people are going to lose their jobs like this, and it's really tough to see. It's really upsetting.
Yeah, as I said, there's a few different ways you can look at this. There's the job losses themselves, which to me, that's an issue of mismanagement. Like, okay, you've lost 45%, or your projections are 45% under. What do you do if you're in charge of that company? Apart from the CEO taking a pay cut and the executive level taking a pay cut, you have to do something. So I understand from a capitalistic perspective, maybe that results in job losses. But what you don't have to do is handle it the way that they handled it.
Absolutely.
And have your CEO go out on Twitter or X and posting about like how this is such a difficult day, and then going on the blog and writing about how it's one of the hardest days in or hardest weeks in the studio's history, and that they've lost a lot of players' trust. like, I don't think it's a time to talk about how we've got an exciting future for Destiny 2. It should be, we're extremely sorry for the way that we handled this and for the hurt that we've caused to the staff by how it was handled. The HR side of it is being completely ignored from that public perspective, and I guess that's because they don't want to open themselves up to potential lawsuits by admitting that there's been trauma as a result of the way people have been fired and let go. But one of the reasons that they have had to make these cuts is because it sounds like they overhired. They built up this company to work on these DLC projects for Destiny 2, these expansions that cost a lot of money because it's like making whole new games. And if they don't sell at the level that they want, suddenly those hires aren't tenable anymore and they have to trim the fat or cut staff that aren't completely essential. Some of the staff that they lost have been there for decades. Like, we're talking back from the Halo days. And that's shocking, really. It's not just that they expanded their teams to work on these DLCs, but, you know, if Destiny 2 expansions aren't selling as well as you hope and making the amount of money that you want them to make to keep these people in jobs, my advice, unsolicited advice over here from a guy that doesn't understand the industry as well as any of the execs in that room, maybe games shouldn't be given a 6-year window to be profitable. Like, maybe you can't expect players to be interested in your game for that long. Maybe you got to know when to fold them and move on to the next game. And the way that this mindset of games as a service and we've got to make money off this for years and years to come. Like, not every game can be Fortnite. Not every game can even be Destiny 2. And so for Destiny 2 to start facing these drawbacks and, you know, starting to bottom out a bit at the end, or to plateau even at the end of this this game's life cycle, it shouldn't be shocking, and it should be expected that people will drop off, from my perspective. And the fact that that's the mindset now, and that's the reason we're not getting the Last of Us factions, because this isn't going to have its, you know, a 10-year window of selling skins to players out there, really ticks me off as a Last of Us fan, because I just want to play it for a year or maybe 2 years. That's enough for me. I don't need it to be the last game I ever buy and the only game I play for the next 10 years, like they kind of want and expect. So it kind of rubs me the wrong way, as you can tell, just in that expectation that this game should live forever, it should be profitable forever, and it should be selling enough to keep all these people in jobs, because it hasn't worked out and they're going to pay for it now.
Yeah, I think the whole thing is really not just exclusive to Bungie. I think the whole thing is really endemic across the entire games industry. I think, like, and not just the studios. I think it's the whole idea of people not realizing that game developers, you know, that's a job, and, you know, I think more consideration needs to be given to the game developers compared to how much is currently being given to the gamers who play. Obviously, like, it's a business, there's capitalistic means towards it, but, you know, 2 days before we heard about Bungie, there was a tweet from Jeff Keighley who said, "This has been probably one of the best years in games ever. Can you think of a year where there's been more high quality games?" And people, quite rightly, as soon as Bungie's debacle happened, people were in the comments like, "Hey, maybe you shouldn't have tweeted this. Maybe this is a little tone deaf. Maybe you should have, you know, recognized that people are losing their jobs day by day by day, year by year, you know, week by week by week. Like, it's just so frustrating." Like, I've been in a studio, like, I've worked only for a very short amount of time, but it's like, you see that sort of stuff happen. I've lost a job in a studio. I know what it's like to be told, "Get your things," like, "Sorry, you're out of here," like that sort of thing. Like, it's a cutthroat business. And while I understand that they needed to just downsize as quick as possible, they handled it so poorly. And I think, like, it's just such a frustrating thing that it's going to keep happening. People are going to handle it badly. Like, you mentioned some of the people who were, you know, fired from Bungie, like Michael Salvatore, who did all of the sort of, like, composer work for Destiny, did some of the great music for them. Like, it's just insane that how carelessly and thoughtlessly they've just done this. And I think now this really needs to be the sort of like spark for studios to be unionizing. As difficult as it's going to be, this is going to keep happening until game workers and game devs stand up and get their rights, because it's just going to keep happening.
Yeah, he wrote the music for Halo, for crying out loud.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, oh my god.
So go enjoy working for Santa Monica or Epic or whoever is going to be lucky enough to hire you next. Like, it is baffling, and it brings me to my last question on this topic, which you can either answer it as a personal question, Tilby, or you can let it be a rhetorical one. But why would anyone want to work in this industry is the question that comes to my mind, because if you are lucky enough not to get fired, you're working in some circumstances that, as we know from doing podcasts like this and covering the news every week, there's often a lot of issues and dramas and toxicity in these workplaces. And if it's not toxic, it's crunch and it's overworked and it's underpaid. And there's so much about the games industry. I'm able to work in the games industry on an independent level as a contractor, and that suits me because I can keep my normal job and continue to like write games on the side. But there's nothing about the games industry that pulls me in thinking like this is the magical land of wonder that we grow up thinking when we play these games, and realize that there are people that actually make these games and they get paid to do that. That's amazing. So to me, it's just like frustrating, as you mentioned. Like, there's a frustration there, but it's also a growing cynicism about what's going to be the future of game development when all the smart and talented people grow up with these skills and look at the wasteland out there and think, do I want to put myself through the anxiety and stress of not knowing whether I'm going to keep my job?
It's tough. Like, I think part of it is definitely for the love of games in general. Like, and I've said this on so many episodes of One Perfect Game before. Like, I grew up, first game was Mario 64, and if I hadn't have done that, I probably would have been, I don't know, a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it may be. But like,
yeah.
But I think
a
like
billionaire by
yeah,
now.
I would have been perfect. But I digress.
Could have been an NBA player.
Yeah, absolutely. I digress. Just like, it's that love of the game, and it's a weird cliche sort of statement, but like, you do it because it's something that you want to create and you want to be part of a long-standing project. And I think people will, as much as people will say that there is crunch and whatnot, like, how many people can say that they've worked on a game like The Last of Us or Grand Theft Auto 5? And I think people will look back on those sorts of experiences and tell their kids, like, I made one of the highest selling games of all time. And I'm not sort of saying this as a way to sort of totally discount any of the sort of utter bullshit that's going on with Bungie. Like, it sort of sours the experience, obviously, for a lot of people, but like, for a game that is successful and sort of becomes something that people look at and sort of remember years on years on years, it's that legacy that those particular developers leave behind. I think, if you were working on Red Dead 2 and that came out, and obviously there was a little bit of crunch there, but it's like,
yeah,
you can tell your kids, I worked on this game that is going to stand the test of time, and that's something that I would have definitely been proud of. But I think in the actual sort of logistics of it, it is tough. I think that is the biggest sort of hurdle for people, especially like myself, who wants to get back into the games industry, obviously in more of a sort of social media and community management side. But like, how do you do that when there's no jobs? How do you do that when there's, for every job that there is, there's probably 50 people who apply for it. So it's a very sort of cutthroat industry. And that's not even counting like the actual dev, positions, your programmers, your people working as producers and things like that. So it is, I think people really need to be waking up and sort of figuring out, this is not the dream that everyone seems to make it out to be, all the sort of terrible, corny ads being like, hey, I pressed a couple buttons and I made a video game. It's not like that. It's multiple years of work. And sometimes it can go well, and sometimes, like in the case of Bungie, it can go pretty badly.
Yep. And I guess if there's anything you can take away from this, it's that developers deserve our utmost respect, praise, and patience when it comes to any communications we have with them. For every developer that's been through this experience, or even if they've stuck around, they haven't lost their job, they've lived through those circumstances, they've lived through that uncertainty and the grind and hustle to make the games that we love. So yeah, game devs deserve all the love and respect.
Miss Allie Hart's Carousel of Chaos.
Anarchy! I don't even know what that means, but I love it!
Matt Tilby, you've got a little game for me this time.
Yes, to finish off my little residency here on the Hungry Gamers, I thought I would be the one to give you a little taste of the Carousel of Chaos, and I picked a Who Am I? So I picked a game or a character, and I mean, obviously you've done a Who Am I before, so you'd know how this sort of works. But any questions before I jump on in?
Let's get to it.
Excellent stuff. Let's begin. I am a game released on the PlayStation on October 20, 1998 in the US. So 25 years. Happy anniversary.
1998. Did you say October?
October 20.
Okay, 1998. Okay, go.
I was developed by SCE Cambridge.
Okay.
I would be best described as an action-adventure or hack-and-slash game, but was originally conceived as an arcade shooter.
Okay.
I do not have a Metacritic score, but I do have an 80% rating on Game Rankings. I am one of the first PlayStation games to require the DualShock controller. You're thinking there?
No, keep going.
The
I'm
wheels
not going
are
to guess this early. Yeah.
In my game, the protagonist can use a number of weapons, including their own arm.
Ooh. Okay. I think I know what it is, but I'll let you continue for a couple more.
Okay. Players can find special chalices if they complete certain tasks in the game, which will unlock the true ending if all chalices are collected.
I'm going to give you one more, then I'm going to guess.
Okay. The protagonist in my game is technically undead.
We're talking about medieval. Are we talking about medieval?
We are talking about medieval. That is a very good guess. Yeah, I thought I would have stumped you there, but I'll read through the rest of the questions I've got just to show you. The game is set in Gallowmere. The villain of this game is named Zarok. The game's art style is heavily inspired by The Nightmare Before Christmas. A sequel to this game was released in 2000. A port was made for PSP in 2005, and a remake was released on PS4 in 2019. The protagonist of this game was part of the roster for PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. The protagonist was a victim of friendly fire. Development of my game began in 1995 under the working title Dead Man Dan. And last but not least, the title of my game is a portmanteau, which I think probably would have given it away there. But yeah,
the chalices I think gave it away for me because I never played this on its original release. It was the remake or the HD port that hit PlayStation in the last couple of years.
Which was not particularly great. It was like, okay.
Yeah. I actually only played it recently, like maybe 2 or 3 months ago. And that was my first. Yeah. So the chalices were very fresh in my mind.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Well, at least you ended up getting that one. So yeah, around sort of 7 or 8, you've done pretty well there. So yeah, congratulations.
Oh, I'm happy with that. There you go.
The week that's yet to come, presented by Dash Water.
Yes, thanks to Dash Water, Brendan's favorite water beverage. High quality H2O. As I've been saying for the past 2 weeks, I got no idea if there's a More Than Hentai coming out. But I'm going to plug it anyway, because that's Brendan's other podcast, More Than Hentai. It's an anime appreciation podcast for those who
he'll appreciate that so much.
He knows it's not my thing. But I recorded an episode for that like 9 months ago, and it's yet to air. So I think that I may have been bumped.
I think you might need to have a word with him once he gets back into Australia.
He says it's still coming, and I believe him. It's just, let's just say maybe I didn't deliver the goods. Maybe I've been bumped for that reason.
Well,
but,
I'll hold out hope for that lost episode. That's for sure.
It'll just be funny listening back. I'll be like, I'm celebrating the birth of my daughter this week, and they'll be like, she's 1 year old now. No, not quite. Anyway, if you've been listening, if you've been on this journey with us the past couple of weeks while Brendan's been away, you'll be part of this ongoing saga of the Five Nights at Freddy's film. To refresh your memory, I predicted that this could be one of the highest grossing video game movies of all time. Tilby laughed and pointed out the likes of Mario and Pikachu and Sonic, and yes, it's I said, okay, maybe not, but what did I say? Top 20, top 15, something like that.
No, you aimed for the stars and you fell dramatically.
And then the following week, I brought up its Rotten Tomatoes score, which is very low, and I kind of walked back my prediction, but I should have stuck with it, Tilby, because the Five Nights at Freddy movie has made $152 million worldwide. It's well on its way. Here's some stats. Critic score, Rotten Tomatoes, 28%. Audience score, 89%. That's one of the biggest differentials on the website, I think.
Yeah, what the hell?
So it had at the box office $132 million for its opening weekend, which is the highest in Blumhouse's history. It's the highest ever for Halloween weekend. It's the highest for a woman-directed horror film, and one of the highest openers for a horror film ever. And it's in the top 20 now for video game box offices. So it's only been out for like 1 or 2, maybe 2 weeks by this point, and I wish I had stuck to my guns on that one, because I walked it back, and I'm ashamed. I should have known.
And is there a sort of like a count on IMDb on how many like in cinema brawls there were? Because like, did you see the footage of all these people having fights during Five Nights at Freddy's screenings? There were just like massive like brawls of people just having fights during I guess while the film had sort of finished. But like, yeah, if you haven't seen it, like go and go, because it was just this weird thing that kept happening at all these sort of screenings.
Is this a phenomenon that's unexplained?
I don't know what's going on anymore. It's really concerning. But look, it's look, I'll give it its due. It definitely didn't seem like it was a particularly strong candidate for any sort of like positive reception, and obviously the TikTok memes went around a bit. But look, top 20 of all time, and those are some decent accolades for a horror film. I think the IP sort of lended itself to that, but yeah, fair play to it.
I think it's good enough for a sequel, I'd guess. And it's kind of it's not that much different from the game Five Nights at Freddy's. Like on paper, it looks pretty, like to my eyes, it looks pretty crap. Like it doesn't look like a polished AAA, well thought out kind of thing. But people love it for some reason, and it's stuck. It's definitely stuck. There's many sequels, and it's made a lot of money. So you can't fault that man that made it, and I think sold all the rights to it to someone else.
I would have been like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. But it's this just weird lore, and they've just sort of like fleshed it out and made it. It feels very B movie-ish, not like as in like the opposite of A movie, and not the Jerry Seinfeld vehicle. For clarification,
I knew what you meant. I don't think anyone was like, oh, it's like B movie.
Yeah, the B fucks a woman.
Yeah. Okay, the movie's coming out this week. We've got a bit more to talk about than last week. The Marvels is probably the main one of the next MCU film, which is the one with Brie Larson as Captain Marvel, as well as trying to remember, is it Ms. So we've got Captain Marvel, Ms. Marvel, and I'm sure some other Marvel characters too. And I've heard that it's pretty good, so we'll see. The Holdovers is a comedy with Paul Giamatti. It's a Wonderful Knife, another horror movie. Journey to Bethlehem sounds like a Christmas film with Antonio Banderas, so go for it. Manodrome is a drama thriller with Jesse Eisenberg and Adrian Brody. The Dirty South is coming out. Your Lucky Day is the other film coming out. So it's getting pretty busy over at the cinema. In the world of TV, we've got 007 Road to a Million, which is an Amazon Prime or a Prime Video reality show that puts contestants through James Bond-esque challenges. I'm guessing without the violence.
And the death.
But, yeah. And the seduction, maybe. But Brian Cox of Succession fame, among other things, is the Bond villain for this one. So I thought that was pretty fun, and that might make it worth a peep. For All Mankind, season 4 comes to Apple TV or Apple Plus, whatever you call it. And then in the gaming space, there's quite a bit happening. We've got The Invincible, Football Manager 2024, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2, Tintin Reporter, Cigars of the Pharaoh, Gunhead, Risk of Rain Returns, Icone Island, An Earthlock Adventure, Like a Dragon, Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name. Or is it Gaiden? Sorry, to
Gaiden.
The Japanese. Yeah, Gaiden. I had it right the first time. Tales of Arise, Beyond the Dawn DLC, Cuisinier, and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. So, what's the pick of the bunch, Tilby?
I mean, we all
I think
know...
you're going to say Football Manager.
If anyone has seen the amount of hours I'd spent on sort of like the early Football Manager games, you'd know why I really enjoy and want to play the next Football Manager.
Question about that.
Yes.
These games like NBA 2K and FIFA, whatever, like they have manager modes in them already, from what I gather. So what's so extra about Football Manager that it's a standalone game? Is it just the level of detail?
It is the level of detail. You invest in the scouting, you invest in your youth teams, and sort of like the whole, full shebang of the club. And you don't actually play the games. You get to sort of coach and manage and bring on subs and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, definitely not for everyone, but I definitely love that sort of feeling of, if you set your tactics right and get players playing and your training methods, and it all comes together and you've got this really good solid team. It's really rewarding. Definitely makes me feel much more nerdy than I probably am. But look, Modern Warfare 3 is the big one. I was really stoked to see how this sort of, I guess, rebooted trilogy has come about. Obviously, the controversy about the PS5 version being like DLC for the second one, and being like there's no platinum trophy for
weird.
This new game, which was very weird. But look, I love this new campaign, and I'm excited to see how the third one goes. And I might dabble a little bit in multiplayer, even though I'm terrible at it. But yeah, they're probably my two. What about you?
Not Call of Duty. I did see some stuff about this today on the socials. IGN gave the campaign a 4 out of 10. And I've heard other people say that it's only 3 or 4 hours long, which is about half as long as others. So it sounds very like half-baked, and like they finally realized that most people don't even touch the campaign. So they deliberately, like, credit to Activision. Like I would say they've put a lot of effort and care into the campaign, despite the lack of people actually playing it over the years. And whenever Call of Duty games come to PS Plus or whatever, I tend to just, I'll give that one a spin, play the campaign, and that's me done, because I'm not the multiplayer guy. So to hear that this one is subpar is disappointing. Probably means I'll never play it, but interesting nonetheless. I think we should give a shout out to Cuisinier. It is a game that we've seen at PAX for the past couple of years. I don't know, Brendan had a chance to play it this year. It's a like restaurant management / dungeon crawling sim, and it's made by a fun little group of devs out of Singapore, I believe. So shout out to them. I've got a soft spot for Tintin as a fan of that franchise from way back. So I'm not going to play it, but I'll be keeping an eye on it to see how it does, and maybe we'll pick it up later at a later date, because things are so busy now with so many games coming out, so much to get through, and the backlog kind of is piling up. But yeah, that's probably it for me. I was going to say The Night Before. Is that the name of that game that just got delayed? It was on this original list. The Day Before. The Day Before is like a survival horror zombie MMO kind of thing that actually looked really AAA and cool. In that sense of, I was hoping like, is this the next Division equivalent that I'm going to get into where I can play through as a solo campaign and still maybe jump on with some friends. But it just got delayed at the last second, like a week before release, for another month. So I'm not holding out hopes anymore that it's going to be as polished as it looks, but it does present really well. So I am still very curious how that's going to turn out. But that will be a topic for Brendan to cover in future episodes of The Hungry Gamers, because we're done. This is it. We're out of here. Thank you, if you've been listening, for sticking with us. I know it's always kind of weird when Steve Carell leaves the office and someone else comes in. James Spader over there. Maybe it's weird for, maybe I'm Andy Bernard taking over. You're used to having a little bit of me. Now you've got a lot of me, and it's just not the same. So if you've enjoyed it, thank you for sticking with us. But it'll be great to have Brendan back in the chair. And I was going to say maybe he's got a tan since moving over there, but they're kind of moving into winter as we're coming into summer, so probably not. Probably no tan for Brendan White.
Yes, he'll have something going on. He'll have his passport sort of stamped up for sure. But look, it's been a fun month or so of covering things with Brendan and yourself. Obviously, as I said, the Hoop Dreams boys getting to create some content once again, and hopefully it's not 3 or so years until I'm back in the seat once again. It was a long time between drinks, but yeah, look, you were stuck with us folks for a couple of weeks, and normal service will hopefully resume next week when Brendan is back. But we thank you so much for allowing us into your ears and letting us talk all things games.
Yeah, and who knows, we might even be back later this year. We've got the biddies coming up, the awards that we do every year. We've got favourite things, maybe. It's usually a Brendan and Ali thing, so I'm not sure what will happen this year, but I'm keen to get some Game of the Year discussion going with 8-Bit this year. So we'll see if we can worm our way back on here. But for now, let's say thanks again to our friends over at Audio Technica for the very best in audio-based goods. Thanks to my friend over here, Matt Tilby, for joining me the past few weeks. Thanks to our dear listeners. And until next time, much love.
And stay hungry.
See you around.